I guess I started this project without it ever occurring to me what the real meaning behind it ever was, let alone the prompt. I look back at it now and realize that was the entire point. At the beginning of the semester, we were told that we would have to pick a place and observe it. I was excited. I am a big people watcher. Oftentimes, me and my friends will sit on campus behind the disguise of our laptops and notebooks knowing no real work is getting done, and we will watch. I have coined an odd term for it. I call it friend farming. I know it's stupid sounding. I do it with two of my closest friends that I've met attending ASU as an out-of-state student. I've known them since the beginning of my freshman year, but in reality, they are not my closest friends. They are my found family. They are the reason that I feel so torn and empty whenever I go back home to Vegas because I know that not all of my heart resides there anymore. It resides out here in Arizona. I like to do this thing where I post on social media when we quote-unquote friend farm because I know that people from our outer circle will see it, and they'll actively seek us out just to talk, catch up, or just sit and enjoy the presence of friends. Whether it's people we're just as close to, or acquaintances we've made over the years, it's interesting to see how the community we've made for ourselves in this large college town get drawn in by our friendship. However, I believe it is a sense of community that makes me feel confident enough to sit in a space and observe those who are going by. When I think of it, it's almost a power dynamic. The privilege to sit and watch in a space, while on the other hand, people have to go along with their daily mundane tasks, rushing to class, walking home, working, etc. To have the time to just sit and simply pay attention to what everyone else is doing is an odd way of moving through the world with an unlearned ease. As a junior, I can sit on campus with my head held high. I can walk to class scanning the faces of people who walk by because I know I can usually spot a friend or two. Yet as a freshman who had just moved to a new state, not knowing a singular soul, I used to focus on the ground, or the buildings, or the unfamiliar terrain. To me, there was no point in watching people. I felt like an outsider in their territory. I needed to find a space in which there was more of a balance, which is why I settled on the airport. I have never particularly liked Sky Harbor. When going home, I prefer to drive. There's nothing that makes me feel more independent than driving across the open desert landscape for hours at a time with nobody but myself. That first drive I made alone to come to ASU was probably what gave me the confidence and showed me that I could live out here by myself with the entirety of my childhood left behind me. But the reason I chose Sky Harbor is because it lacks stability. There is no sense of stability in airports. It's not like anyone's there to stay. It's merely a space that exists to pass through. No hierarchy, no community. Or so I thought. As long as you have a ticket, you're all going somewhere, whether it's economy or first class. I will admit, it did feel weird to go to the airport without a destination. For a second, it felt like that power dynamic I had created in my mind swapped. It felt like that, until I realized that with the hustle and bustle, with people hurrying to their Ubers, grabbing their luggage, finding their loved ones, no one would pay me any mind for my presence there. There was no power dynamic. This space eliminated it. Even before arriving to the airport, I figured it was going to be hard for me to find an area to settle into. At least from my past experiences, airports are busy and crowded. Finding open seats and tables are as hard as finding a study spot in the library during finals week. Yet upon my arrival, I managed to find a table branched off from a coffee bean. Crumbs and a crumpled napkin were on the table, but it wasn't going to stop me. I cleaned up the area and sat down. I decided to set up the camera on my phone to film, as I logged written notes in my journal as well. It wasn't until I wrote the date that I then realized that I found myself sitting in an airport on September 11th, 2025, exactly 24 years from the deadliest terrorist attack in aviation history. Never forget, I guess. It felt crazy how easily it had slipped my mind, but when I thought about it, looking back, 9/11 was always a somber day in grade school because of the films and documentaries we were required to watch on the subject matter. I went to a private school too, and I always remembered being forced to wear our red polos as a way of remembrance. It was inescapable. Not that it was bad for us to learn about the tragedy, but with the structure of school, it made it feel like the morning was part of the curriculum. I thought falling out of that normal school schedule and going into university caused me to forget. Yet here I was on a Thursday morning, sitting casually in an airport when 3 years earlier, I probably would have been an AP Gov. And now I was remembering more than ever before. The first thing to draw my attention was a live band playing music. I don't think that was normal. I couldn't think of the last time I was in an airport with a group of musicians strumming and playing the piano casually. It was odd, but it was also comforting. It wasn't too loud or too upbeat. It set the scene for my observation. As people descended into the baggage claim area from their gates, I noticed an unusual amount of patriotic gear being worn by the passerbyers. One elderly woman in an American flag shirt came and stood in the frame of my camera for a good amount of time. Not a phone in sight, just standing in the middle of foot traffic looking around. I guess it would make sense to want to feel patriotic in rebuttal to a day in remembrance to one of America's greatest tragedies. Perhaps to remind ourselves that we made it out of whatever hell we had been put through. Following up the first couple thoughts, I then noted that surprisingly, in the year of 2025, here in the airport, face masks were still being worn. Not that I think that's bad. I understand that the practice of still wearing masks when you find yourself under the weather but needing to be in public spaces is very respectful and normal. For me, it was more or less a blast from the past. It reminded me of a time where everyone in the airport was required to wear masks, when the only glimpse we would get of strangers out in public was the upper half of their face, when the reveal of a person's nose and mouth felt intimate, especially when the only interactions you had ever had with them were with masks on. Such an odd time to have lived through. I remember trying to imagine what life would look like after COVID during peak quarantine, and nothing could come to mind. In reality, I guess there never was an end to COVID, more or less a coexistence, a compromise. It is remarkable to see the hold that it still has on everyday life every once in a while. Although I have so many observations from this day, I think the one that I will end off on was the absence of different cultures and languages in the airport. The airport! I cannot recall a time I have been in the airport and haven't heard at least 3 different languages that aren't English. I sat and listened. I tried to pick up on any word that led me astray, but nothing. And looking around, I really couldn't help but notice that there wasn't many people who weren't white. I'm not saying that there wasn't any people of color at all, just a lot less than I would usually expect from an airport, a place of travel. Once I noticed it, I couldn't help but wonder if it was because of the day that I had ended up doing my first observation on. It's a known fact that after 9/11, discrimination and hate crimes towards Middle Easterns, South Asians, Muslims, and Arabs grew immensely. Additionally, as air travel security tightened their protocols for safety, bias and racial profiling made it very hard for POC to navigate airports. So I pondered to myself, do people of color, specifically Middle Eastern, South Asians, Muslims, etc., feel less comfortable traveling on 9/11? I guess it could make sense. It was just sad to possibly see it happening in real time, right in front of my eyes. I guess the only way to see if I wasn't crazy to come to this conclusion was to finish my other observation in a couple weeks, which is exactly what I ended up doing. I found myself in Sky Harbor again on Tuesday, November 25th. I knew this observation was going to be shorter than the first one, as I was really coming for answers from my past observation, to see if the date had really affected the overall outcome of my initial conclusion. I sat down in one of the airport chairs by the baggage claim, leaving one spot between me and a person who was loudly arguing on the phone with someone in a different language. I presume the language to be Arabic, just because I have a close friend who tends to speak it at home and around me. But it was the first thing that I noted. No live music, just the sharp words of a language I couldn't exactly understand besides me. But it didn't upset me, made me feel more confident in my thoughts. I wasn't able to film now, as I lacked a surface to set my phone against. I watched as people picked up their bags. Not nearly as many patriotic shirts today. I only saw one, and at further notice, I realized it was a shirt celebrating just Alaska and said, not the entirety of America. I noticed a few mask wearers here and there, a lot of which I noted were not white, bringing me to the last conclusion, that the airport was a place of cultural blending. Perhaps what I observed the first time was a coincidence. Maybe I wasn't paying attention to the right things, or maybe I was seeking out information for a conclusion I had already jumped to in my brain. Either way, it was odd, unsettling, but it made sense. To see big events in history from years ago leave a drag path behind, forever reminding us of our past. Having the time to sit and observe and think. Coming to conclusions on my own without the input of another person, without even having to leave my own brain as I moved from one observation to the next. It allowed me to reminisce on my own life, what connections I could make to the strangers around me, that they would never even know about. I don't think I ever ended up feeling like I belonged in the airport, but in the end, I don't think that was the point. I did lose the discomfort I had created thinking I wasn't supposed to be there. The airport is a liminal space, you know. No one is supposed to be there forever. So any comfort I had found belonging in that space was based off of the people around me, the community. I guess I was able to discover some form of it there. The sense that everyone would eventually leave via plane or car, eventually reaching their destinations. We all had that in common. Almost like the community I find on campus that gives me the confidence to just sit and observe. I found it by myself in the airport.